Peter Dutton is promising cheaper gas as one of his centerpiece promises in this election campaign. In fact, it was the heart of his budget reply speech delivered just over 2 weeks ago, right before the campaign began. The idea is to have an East Coast gas reservation. That means gas, instead of being exported, has to be sold at a cheaper price here in Australia. It's an idea that's been welcomed by groups on the left, including the Australia Institute, but the gas industry not happy at all about the prospect of lower profits. And they warn that over time this will mean less gas supply in the market. So how exactly will this work? How reliable is the modelling behind this that was only released just this week? Well, I'm keen to talk to the man behind the numbers. I'm David Speers on Ngunnawal Country at Parliament House in Canberra. Welcome to Insiders on Background. Danny Price is from Frontier Economics and has done this modelling on the Coalition's gas policy. Good to talk to you, Danny. Thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, well, thanks for the opportunity to talk about it.
So I'll get to exactly how this gas reservation, East Coast gas reservation idea is going to work and the numbers you've found. Just give us a bit of a sense of the process here. We haven't actually seen a lot of detail from the Coalition. You presumably have. Did you sit down with them to work out exactly how this new idea would work?
Yeah, well, the idea is not new. In fact, I wrote about this in an opinion piece back in 2022, and it's not a novel idea, so it's been around for a very long time.
So was it your idea initially back a few years ago?
No. Well, I wrote about this back in 2022, but the idea of the way in which this decoupling scheme and gas reservation work has been around for a very long time. So Western Australia, for example, has had a gas reservation scheme in place since 2006, and almost every country in the world that produces gas has some form of arrangement to encourage supply to the domestic market at costs, or some sort of public interest test before you export or something like that.
And was your initial idea a few years back to just apply this to new projects, or was it always to apply it to existing projects?
Well, it can be used generally, and I didn't really go into any detail about kind of how it would work. And back last year when we were looking at the nuclear power modelling, again, that was something that we considered back in the modelling back then. But I knew that the Australian Energy Market Operator was going to produce an updated version of what they call their gas statement of opportunities, which is a really critical input into this scheme back. And they had foreshadowed that this would come out in the 20th of March or thereabouts, and so I wanted to wait until the latest information. That's why timing of it. Yeah.
So you really could only do this work after the 20th of March, when we found out what the outlook was like for gas for the coming year.
Yeah, so the modelling had already been set up, and there's, as I say in that the note which Minister Bowen talks about as being as a Chinese menu, it's a very simple piece of analysis because it's not a very complex arrangement. It's really just taking two numbers which are produced by government agencies and subtracting one number from another number. So it doesn't require hundreds of pages. What the hundreds of pages really relates to is the work by the government agencies that produce those numbers.
Okay, so and I'll get to how simple this is going to be, but just to be clear, when did you actually finish the modelling on this for the Coalition?
Last week, yeah.
Right. So it was after Peter Dutton's budget reply speech where he announced it.
It was about the same time. So you can't. We have to verify all those numbers. So the so-called GSU, the Gas Statement of Opportunity, came out on the 20th of March, and so we started going through that to make sure that it all still made sense, and then just put those numbers together. So it was about the same time.
Okay, so then just give us a simple explanation, if you can, of how this will work. How will it change the way we export gas or keep gas here?
It probably won't change very much about how much you export. In fact, if anything, the quantity of exports ought to go up, not down. It really relates to ensuring that Australian gas consumers get a better deal than they've been getting to date. And to be honest, the gas producers could have come up with an arrangement themselves instead of they've been for years having a lend of gas consumers. And if they thought for a moment that nothing was going to happen, well, that's not true. I mean, governments ultimately react to customers being worked over by the producers, and that's what's happened here. And so the way the arrangement works is really very simple. The gas producers prefer to sell gas at the highest price they can, and of course that's what they're meant to do. It's like that's what the private companies. That's exactly what you'd anticipate they'd do. And so the highest price markets, the ones who can bear the highest prices, are international markets, and so they prefer to sell gas to international customers, and of course that earns us, foreign reserves, which is very good, and they pay royalties along the way, not very much, and sometimes they even pay tax. But basically, customers in Australia are left having to pay effectively the high export price. And so every gas producer that's operating at the moment and exporting overseas had developed their projects based upon gas prices at the time, which are half of what they are now. And so for them to run around saying, oh, look, it's going to affect investment, that's just completely bogus. They're making a king's ransom out of the gas they sell overseas. And remembering, of course, it's not their gas. It's the gas. That gas is owned by all Australians. Of course. The government permits them to take advantage of that gas and to produce the gas and to sell the gas.
And they're selling it at the moment on the export market at around, what is it, $14 a gigajoule?
It's about, so of course there's a lot of variability in all of this, but use these numbers as good indicators. So Japan LNG price is about $16. It takes about $2 to export that gas. So what the producers are getting in net terms, it's called a netback price, is about $14.
Okay.
And for most of those producers, the costs of producing that gas would be less than $8.
Right.
And so you can see that they're making a lot of money over what their costs are. And when I talk about costs all through this interview, I'm talking about their cash costs plus a return. So they've already getting a return, but then they get this so-called super profit or excess profits on top of that. And of course, they're screaming about the scheme because they want to keep these super profits. They don't want to give them up.
So how was the $10 a gigajoule price arrived at? If they can make it for, you're saying, $8, why not go for a $9 price here?
Yeah, so we have in economics and this concept of marginal costs, and that is the cost of the highest highest cost producer selling into a market, and so that is generally considered as the efficient market price. And so, if the most expensive producing gas producer is $10 a gigajoule,
so one of them might have higher costs. So the $10 is probably what the highest cost producer is able to do.
Yeah, that's right, and that's not to say that. And a number of gas producers have contacted me and said, well, what happens to our project at $11 or $12 or $13? Well, you wouldn't get away. You wouldn't get that project away in a market anyway. And particularly if you think that that these excessive international prices are not going to persist, why would you do that project? And so what we did was use our understanding of market and economics to figure out what the costs were of the highest cost producing gas producer on the East Coast, and that's around about it's less than $10. And so the $10 has already got some buffer in it. And so what we say is we think that the price that they should be selling to domestic consumers is $10 or less, and they're still making a healthy return. As I say, the costs include a return to the investor. And so we're not asking them to make no return.
Yeah, and does that mean $10 a gigajoule, regardless of whether you're in Queensland, New South Wales, or Victoria, or is there do you factor in the transport cost?
Yeah, so that's a very good question, and there's a lot of misinformation being peddled by the government on this. So, in the gas market, and there's a reference point. The reference point is in southwest Queensland called Wallumbilla, and so when we talk about a gas price on the eastern seaboard, Wallumbilla is the reference point for that, and so the cost of getting gas from Wallumbilla to Victoria, for example, is around about $2.50 a gigajoule. So a Wallumbilla price of $10 converts into about $12.50 in Victoria.
So this will be a little more. It will be more like $12.50 a gigajoule in Victoria.
Once you take into transport costs, that's right, and we account for all of that when we calculated the cost savings. So it's not as if we've forgotten that. We know that we understand that very well.
Okay, but the idea that it would be $10 a gigajoule in Victoria is not quite right.
The reference price is Wallumbilla, and then but
which is in Queensland. You're not going to get $10 a gigajoule in Victoria.
Well, if the gas has been produced in Queensland and then transported down to Victoria, it would be another $2.50, but we take that into account when calculating the cost savings. But that's not to say there's not $10 gas in Victoria. The problem of Victoria, of course, is that the state government policy has meant that it's been impossible to do any gas exploration down here.
Some of that's changing now. Well, I'll come to that. But there's also been this concern around the pipeline being at capacity. Industry says, it's at capacity. What do you say to that?
It's true, and this is what happens in the way gas pipeline companies operate. They deliberately build enough capacity just to meet the requirements to move gas from one point to another. Every single gas company, and APA is the main company in question here, they have always a number of projects on their books that can easily increase capacity, either by improving pressurisation of the line, by pumping, so-called looping, that's adding an extra length to the pipeline. All of these things are projects that they have ready to go, and so the part of the coalition's suite of policies was to include $1 billion of funding to reduce those constraints. And so
it could take some time, though, right?
Of course, it's not instantaneous, but it's not a lot of time. These pipeline companies, they will always say, "Oh, it's at capacity, therefore you have to pay a lot for the capacity." That's how they make money. But if there's more gas, then it's in their interest to move as quickly as possible to get that gas moving through the pipelines because they make more money. So the incentives are aligned here.
Okay, so let's look at what you found. Just talk us through the savings for industry and for households based on your modelling.
Yeah, so probably easy just to talk about. So it's a 23% average reduction in wholesale costs. And at Wallumbilla. And so if we look at what that means for the average industrial customer, it's about a 15% price reduction. And so these, I might add, these percentages, it's really important to understand why the percentages are different for the same wholesale cost reduction. And that's because what makes up a bill to a customer includes the so-called wholesale cost, that's the gas. And then there's the transport cost of that gas. So if you use more pipelines, the large-scale ones and the small reticulation ones around the street, then they become a bigger component of your cost. And so the percentage reduction in gas prices declines as more pipeline costs go into your bill. And so industrial customers are connected to the large scale pipes, and so it's not a big component of their costs.
And with just on that, I mean, given what we're talking about with the transport cost to Victoria, would there still be a 15% saving for industry in Victoria?
Yes, because it's relative to the base. That's relative to the base case, and so the base case includes that.
Yep. Okay, and then for households.
For households, it's about 7% for gas consumers, and then we also modelled the effect in the of gas power generation to electricity consumers. And so if anyone knows anything about electricity modelling, it could produce a 1,000-page report which no one would have read.
We could do a whole lot of conversation on how the electricity prices put together.
Yeah, and every time we produce one of those reports, everyone says, "Oh, can't you do something simpler?"
Yeah.
And so we did the simpler thing, and we're being condemned for doing something simpler as well. So you can't win.
No.
And so it's very sophisticated modelling, but basically you don't use that much gas to produce electricity. It's only really a sort of peak time, so you wouldn't expect a big impact. But in spite of that, we end up with the wholesale component, which is about 40% of your bill, reduces by about 8%, and that then translates into a 3% reduction for your final electricity bill. So if you're a consumer that has both gas and electricity, you get the 7% reduction for your domestic gas, and then you get a 3% reduction
for your electricity.
Yeah.
And given modelling always involves various assumptions, and when we're talking about how the electricity price actually is put together, there's a lot of as you indicate, a lot of complexity in it. How much certainty do you have in those sort of figures you've come up with?
Yeah, so maybe if I step back from start with the electricity modelling, it's really important to say, all other things being equal. So there's so many things that go on in the electricity market, literally thousands and thousands of different variables all interacting. And so we change one thing and then translates into a 3% price reduction. If all those other things are moving in the opposite direction, of course, that price reduction would be potentially reduced or wiped out. But
what sort of factors might see that happen?
For example, if a big coal-fired generator closed, almost certainly that will send wholesale prices much higher, as we've seen every time a coal-fired power station closes. Prices go up and dramatically so.
So if there's a big coal closure, this gas plan might not save any money for households.
Yeah, that's why we say all other things being equal. And I note that Ted O'Brien was at pains to kind of make that point as well, and so that's why he says that. And I noticed yesterday at the debate between the minister and Ted O'Brien that they're both preaching caution when it comes to electricity market modelling. And we obviously do a lot of it, and I always say to our clients and to everybody else, you have to understand kind of what the model can do and can't do. They are very complex. And they're very useful for understanding kind of what's going on in markets, but generally pretty poor predictors of markets because of the sheer size of variability that goes on in these markets. And for domestic customers, the 7% reduction, I'm much more certain about that because the gas pipeline costs aren't going to change very much. And so what we say in the note is that all new sales of gas would be affected by this scheme. So to the extent that people are already on kind of long-term contracts, then obviously it doesn't affect them because they've got a long-term contract.
Yeah, exactly.
But any new sales, we've been really clear about that.
That brings up the question of when people would see the price reduction. There's been a bit of debate about this. What's your? I mean, you've referred to a lag, I think, in your modelling. When would households see the benefit?
Well, some households will see it almost immediately, and in fact, I've had a number of gas producers ring me to let me know what they think about this because of course this means that they get less profit.
Yeah, what were some of those calls like?
Well, a lot of them are our clients, so they're pretty dark about it, of course. But kind of bad luck. As I say, they could have fixed this problem themselves, they chose not to. And of course, one of the things that is happening already, because of the prospect of a scheme like this, customers feel like that they're in a better bargaining position, and so I suspect it's having an immediate effect already. And so
on the timing, some might see it straight away, you reckon? But what about most customers?
Oh, they'll see it over the course of 25, 26. I mean, 100 PJ of gas is a fair bit.
Okay.
Yeah,
and then what about this argument around the second round effect? So the producers you talk about there, they're not happy because this, it means a fixed lower price than they're getting at the moment. And they're warning that this is going to see a slowdown in supply. If they're not able to make the same money, they won't provide as much gas into the market. And that's, I guess, usual market force. If you have a fixed low price, supply will slow down. Is that something you've factored in?
Oh, of course. This is a market we know very, very well. And so I'll just step back to something I said earlier, that every gas producer that's exporting at the moment did not forecast the prices that they're earning now. What they based their projects on were prices that are almost half of what they are at the moment.
Right.
And they were making a healthy return out of that. Of course, costs have gone up since those projects have been developed, and so their costs, including return, are higher, which reflects the $10 a gigajoule.
I mean, some of them though, we've heard from Amplitude Energy. I don't know if you know these guys, but they're aiming to develop, I think, 400 petajoules of gas from 3 wells across the Otway Basin, and their chief executive reckons this is going to spook investment. They'll stay on the sidelines. If they're not going to get a strong return, why would they put money into the project? Is that a realistic scenario?
Well, if their project is uneconomic, then it probably wouldn't have gone ahead anyway. So no investor is going to make a financial commitment to a project that is relying upon short-term high prices in the export market,
But it could mean less supply, couldn't it?
Well, less expensive supply, but there's a number of projects. Make no mistake, there's a number of projects that are sub $10, and they're the projects that we want. We don't want expensive projects. We don't want customers feeling the need to sign up to an expensive project because it might be cheaper than the excessive prices that are being charged on in the export market. That's the point. The whole point is to try and get Australians onto lower cost projects and cheaper long-term prices. And so what that means, of course, is that people who use gas, they will have, with this scheme in place, they'll have much more certainty over the very long term to invest in technology that uses gas and supplies jobs to people. So that's the aim of the proposal. A
couple of other things: having more gas, 20% more gas in the national energy market. What does that mean for renewable investment? Is it likely to, I don't know, slow down or spook renewables investors?
Oh, absolutely not. In fact, exactly the opposite.
Right.
There's going to be a limit. We're rapidly approaching the limit of how much renewables we can the system can cope with, and so that's why, for example, the government has announced this subsidies on batteries, and the reason why they're doing that is because there's so many renewables in the middle of the day that it's de-energising the high voltage network, and that means that the network is close to collapse, and particularly in places like Queensland, and so you need something to absorb all this excessive.
Do you like that idea of the battery, more batteries? Government rebates to get more batteries out there.
No, I think the whole. Of course, consumers love subsidies, but they come at an enormous cost. So trying to make out that this is somehow reducing, making consumers better off. Well, subsidies come at the cost of somebody, and that will be a taxpayer. So you either get cheap electricity and high taxes, or lower taxes and more expensive electricity. It's one or the other. It's not both. And interestingly, and this point has been made, is that it really goes to people who have solar panels, and there's a lot of people with solar panels, but batteries aren't cheap, and so you still have to stump up 70% of the cost of the battery, and so most people can't afford that. So the people who will get the subsidies are people who are wealthy, and so this is reversing tax flows.
Yeah, I mean, I get the point there about who's going to benefit the most from this. Will it help the overall energy system though, if there's more household batteries running?
Well, if you keep on pouring more subsidised solar panels into the system, it will help stabilise it. But is that the best way to go about it? Of course not. It's a very expensive. Solar panels and batteries are a very expensive way to supply energy to consumers. It's cheap to consumers because of the subsidies.
But the upfront cost, you're saying, is not an efficient way of delivering an energy system.
No, it's terrible. It's what economists refer to as the resource cost. That's the actual costs of using resources in the economy. It's a very expensive way of supplying electricity. But you can see why consumers do this, because first of all they get a subsidy, and second of all, it gives them a sense of control over a big item on their household bill.
They get away from the price fluctuations.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. I mean, I completely am sympathetic with it, but and it really is a reflection of bad government policy.
Let me ask you just finally on nuclear, because you did the coalition's modelling on the nuclear policy as well, which did find that it's going to be cheaper to have 7 nuclear power plants built with government money than the current system that we're on. But does it mean we get cheaper power at the end of the day?
Yeah, so there's no world in which Australians aren't going to bear a lot of costs. If you head towards a net zero target, it will come at an enormous cost. And so long as Australians know what that cost is and still want to do it, then that's fine. That's how kind of democracy works.
But to try and make out that give us a cheaper option, will it be a cheaper power?
Yeah,
bill?
and that's the thing, is that what is the least cost way of getting there, knowing that you have to bear the costs of doing something to reduce emissions. What's the least cost way of doing it? And that's why I got interested in nuclear, because no one was talking about it, yet all these other countries were doing it. And just thinking about it, I thought, actually, I think it probably would be cheaper. And here's the reason why. So everyone talks about renewables being the cheapest form of generation. It's only true for a particular generator when it's operating. But the problem is that they only operate about a third of the time. And so to produce the same amount of energy, you need 3 times as much. It's a very simple formula. Then you need to store it because it doesn't operate all the time, and then you need to back it up. And so what I heard Minister Bowen saying at the debate is it's the cheapest form of generation even when you firm it up. And what he's doing is he's taking one renewable generator and firming it up. But what he's forgetting to tell you is that you need 3 times as much capacity, and then to store it, and then to firm it. And so you can go through the arithmetic yourself, and then you can figure out, in fact, that's more expensive than having a baseload generator of some kind, whether it's coal, which no one wants to do, or if it's a nuclear power station. And once you take all of those costs into account, then a system that is a blend of renewables, mostly, some nuclear, and a little bit of gas to get you along the way, but gas ultimately falls out of the system altogether. With nuclear, you don't need it, whereas in a renewable-owned system, you need gas like forevermore. And so that's the analysis that we did.
Yeah, okay. But did that analysis look at power prices, what the household's going to pay?
No, we didn't, because the power prices are determined primarily by the pricing structure that's put in place. I mean, the government's already got a review of how that pricing arrangement works in the national electricity market. The idea that, and I said this in the report, the idea that the current pricing system is going to be retained between now and 2050 is ludicrous. And so
it's
I was not going
to... It's impossible to know.
It's a ridiculous task to try and do.
Right.
And so
when Peter Dutton says your power bills will be 44% lower with nuclear, you're not saying that.
No. So what Peter Dutton said was that the modelling shows that the costs would be 44% lower, and that's exactly what we.
Yeah, he's that's exactly what we meant to say. Your bills will also be 44% lower.
Yeah, I think it's just a confusion over kind of what the terms are, and everyone's confused about electricity. It's a very complex area.
Okay, but it's impossible to know if the bills will be cheaper.
Well, there's no doubt in my mind that as compared to what the government's promoting or pursuing versus a mix, there's no doubt that with nuclear in the mix, the costs will be lower, and in a competitive market, those costs will be translated into lower prices. There's zero doubt about that.
Danny Price, really appreciate the conversation and you shedding a bit more light on the work that you've done here for the Coalition on this gas plan. Thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks very much for the opportunity. Thanks, David.
And thanks for your company as well. Do drop us a line if you have any thoughts on this conversation. insiders@abc.net.au. We'll have more on this and everything else that's been happening on the campaign on Insiders Sunday morning. It has been another big week, week 2 of the contest, and a big week coming up as well. I'll be talking to Claire O'Neill, the Housing Minister, ahead of the Labor campaign launch that's happening in Perth on Sunday morning. I'll also be joined by Monique Ryan, the independent member for Kooyong. We have extended 90-minute editions of Insiders through the campaign, so do join us 9 a.m. on Sunday morning on ABC TV.
You're making us all feel very excited about being here.